Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Gimel, and Mirz Hashem today we will be learning Daf Chaf Aleph Amud Beis. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Shabbos. We've been learning the halachas of Shahiya, the halacha of putting food on a fire on Erev Shabbos so that it should remain on the fire on Shabbos. When are you allowed to perform Shahiya? When are you not allowed to perform Shahiya? At the end of yesterday's share, the Ramah did a little bit of a pivot, and we started to discuss Chazara. We'll give a brief little recap. We pick up today on Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, Siman Reish Nun Gimel. We're still in the middle of Sif Aleph. I think today is share number 4 on Sif Aleph, but I believe today we will, Mirz Hashem, complete Sif Aleph, even though we have quite a bit to cover, but I hope that we'll complete Sif Aleph. So we begin on Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, top line, in the words of the Ramah, where the Ramah says, V'im hechaziroi Yisrael, right by the Eis Katan Lamed Hey for the Mishnah Berurah. Our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kabeis Yisrael, Hanesunim Batzaru Ba'ashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Bein Bayabasha, Hamakayim Yerachem Aleihem V'yitziam Mitzara L'Rvacha, Me'afela L'Oiro Mishibud L'Geula, Hashta Bagalo of his man Kariv and Emaramein. Our learning should be a schus for Fui Shalema for David ben Balima, and Baruch Hashem, I could say that I've been asking for some time now that people should have in mind a chaver of mine who needs a Yeshua. Baruch Hashem, he received very good news today, and it looks like the Rebbeinu Shalom was mezaki him, and he received quite a bit of a hatzalah. So thank you for all of those who had it in mind. Okay, so here in Siman Reish Nun Gimel, we'll keep it very brief because we've gone over this already several times. I don't think we have to get too intense about it. But we've been discussing the shaila of Shahiya. Like I said before, Shahiya is when you take food, you put it on the fire before Shabbos. It's Erev Shabbos, you can do what you want, really. So you're putting food on the fire before Shabbos, and you want it to remain there on Shabbos. And we've seen that Shahiya is subject to certain restrictions. So far, we've been learning the Deya Rishona, the first opinion brought down by the Mechaber. This is the opinion that of the Rif, the Rambam, that paskin like the Chachamim. You have an Machlokes, the Chachamim and Chananya in Masechta Shabbos. It's the Ibaya Delay Ifshita in the Gemara, and we have the Rif and the Rambam that go l'chumra. They paskin like the Chachamim, and they subject Shahiya to very strict restrictions. And they say, when are you allowed to do Shahiya? Only if the food that you're putting on the fire on Erev Shabbos is mevushal kol tzarchai, it's completely cooked. But not only is it completely cooked, it's mitztamek v'raloi. If it's mitztamek v'raloi, should it stay on the fire and continue to cook, it would be to the detriment of the food. Then we allow you to do Shahiya. We allow you to put it on before Shabbos and let it stay there on Shabbos. What's the problem with Shahiya? The whole problem with Shahiya is Gzeira Shemiyechata B'Gechalim. We're afraid that if food is on the fire on Shabbos and accelerating the cooking would be beneficial, then somebody might go ahead and stoke up the coals, be over on Havara, maybe be over on Bishul Daraisa, and go ahead and do that in order to get the food ready sooner. But if the food is mevushal kol tzarchai and it's mitztamek v'raloi, there's no reason he would do it. We've also seen that these restrictions are only in play if you have a kira that's fired up with gefes ve'etzim. If you have a kira that's fired up with fuel that will create coals, then you have an issue of Shemiyechata B'Gechalim. But if it's fired up with kashu givava, if it's fired up with fuels that don't make coals, there's no room to make Gzeira Shemiyechata B'Gechalim. We've also discussed Grufa Uketuma. If you have a kira that's fired up even with Gefes Ve'etzim, but it's Grufa, you swept out all of the coals, why would there be Gzeira Shemiyechata B'Gechalim? There's nothing to be mechata. Also, we saw ketuma. If you go ahead and you bank the coals with ash, then you've done a maisa to show that you're not interested in any more intense heat. You're basically done with the cooking. There's no reason now that you're going to go ahead and do a 180-degree switcheroo and decide that you're going to go be mechata b'gechalim. So we've seen that these are all ways kind of to circumvent the issue of Shemiyechata B'Gechalim and to circumvent the Isser of Shahiya. We had some other details, but we're not doing a whole chazara of Siman Reish and Gimel right now. Now, yesterday, near the end of this year, the Mechaber, having laid out to us all of the ramifications of this day of Rishona that are machbir by Shehiyah, so the Mechaber came along, and the Mechaber said, okay, now, bottom line, what happens if somebody forgot shachach v'shah? Somebody was in a situation where Shehiyah was aser, so either he had only partially cooked food, it wasn't mavushal kol tzarchai, or he had food that was mavushal kol tzarchai, but it's mitztamik v'yofeloi, continued cooking would be beneficial. He's got a kira that's got gefes ve'etzim, it's got coal inside, it's not goruf, it's not kotum, so here we have a situation where Shehiyah is aser, but shachach v'shah, he forgot, and Erev Shabbos, he left the pot on the fire. What's the halacha? Said the Mechaber, no, he's a shoygeg, shachach v'shah, so now it depends. What level of cooking was this food at? If it wasn't mevushal kol tzarchai, if the food was not fully cooked, well then, what took place on Shabbos is actual bishul. The food was not mevushal kol tzarchai, it cooked on Shabbos, and you received a tremendous amount of benefit from the fact that you went against the Issa D'Rabbanan of Shehiyah, albeit b'shoigeg, you didn't do it intentionally, but you were shaha, you performed Shehiyah when it was also b'D'Rabbanan, you gained a lot by it because the food wasn't really edible, and now it's edible. In that case, the Mechaber said the food is aser ad Motzei Shabbos, and the Mishnah Berurah told us that, at least the opinion of the Gas Ashri, it means that it's aser ad b'chtei sheyaseh. You have to wait after Shabbos enough time that it could have gotten cooked after Shabbos. He said that the Rambam disagrees. However, if the food was fully cooked, if it was mavushal kol tzarchai, but it was mitztamik v'yothaloi, so then you gained from the fact that you performed Shehiyah, because it was mitztamik v'yothaloi, the food continued to cook and it got even better, but you didn't gain so much. The food was already edible before you put it on the fire. Before Shabbos started, the food was fully edible. The only gain that you got was, the chicken got a little bit more caramelized, the cholent got a little bit more cooked in, but, you like it drier. But says the Mishnah Berurah, that's a very small gain. No, you are shachach v'shah, you did shehiyah b'shoigeg because you forgot. You got a small gain of mitztamik v'yafalai, says the Mechaber. In that case, the food is mutter and you can eat the food. So that was the case of shachach v'shah. Then the Mechaber said, how about avar v'shah? How about if you intentionally performed shehiyah when shehiyah was also b'drabanan? So you took that food that was mavushal kol tzarchai and it was mitztamik v'yafalai, and you intentionally put it on the fire before Shabbos, intending for it to stay on the fire on Shabbos and get better against the Issa D'Rabbanan of Shehiyah. Said the Mechaber, in that case, you transgressed the Issa D'Rabbanan D'Oraisa. In that case, the Mechaber said, whether the food was fully cooked and it's mitztamik v'yafalai, or the food wasn't fully cooked at all, either way, the food is aser until Motzei Shabbos. Then the Ramah did a little bit of a pivot. And the Ramah said, okay, until now we were talking about Shehiyah. How about Chazorah? Now really, we're not discussing Chazorah here. Really, Chazorah is going to be in Sif Beis. We haven't really covered Chazorah. But the Ramah brings up Chazorah over here because it has a relationship with the halacha that we just discussed of Shehiyah. What's Chazorah? Chazorah is when you had a pot on the fire on Shabbos, the pot was taken off the fire, and now you put it back on the fire. Now, there's a great big difference between Chazorah and Shehiyah. By Shehiyah, you didn't do anything on Shabbos. By Shehiyah, the ma'aseh that you did on Erev Shabbos. The pot stayed on the fire on Shabbos. By Chazorah, you took a pot and you put it on the fire on Shabbos. Now, it already was on the fire at one point on Shabbos, but it came off. And you put it back on. So you put the pot back on Shabbos. That's Chazorah. Chazorah is always more chamor than Shehiyah for that very reason. Because by Chazorah, you're doing a ma'aseh on Shabbos. So says the Ramah like this. let's say what happened was an Eina Yehudi did Chazara. You didn't do Chazara. You had the pot on the fire. You took it off. The Eina Yehudi came into the kitchen. He saw that the pot was off the fire. He put the pot back on the fire. What's the halacha now? Said the Ramah, he said, if an Eina Yehudi does Chazara, that's the equivalent of a Yehudi, a Yisrael, doing Shahiya b'shoigeg. Shachach v'shah. The Ramah said, Im hechziram Eina Yehudi b'Shabbos, if an Eina Yehudi performed Chazara on Shabbos, dinoi keshachach v'shah. It gets the same halacha as if a Yid did Shahiya b'shoigeg. Okay, what's the halacha of a Yid that does Shahiya b'shoigeg? So it depends. If the food was mavushal kol tzarchai, and it was just mitztamik v'yafalai, the food is mutter. So if the Eina Yehudi does Chazara on Shabbos, and the only benefit that you got was the benefit of mitztamik v'yafalai, the food is mutter. But if the food was not mavushal kol tzarchai, and the Eina Yehudi put it back on the fire on Shabbos, and it cooked on Shabbos, then the food is asur. So that's the halacha if an Eina Yehudi does Chazara on Shabbos. Now I'm going to mention one point over here. It's going to bring up a kasha. There's going to be a shverkeit that we're going to have to discuss a little bit later in this year. And that is a Mishnah Berurah that we saw at the end of yesterday's shir. The Mishnah Berurah said in Ois Katan Lamed Daled, all the way on the bottom of Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, the Mishnah Berurah said, why is this true? What's the rationale between what the Ramah just said? The Ramah drew an equivalence between an Eina Yehudi doing Chazara and a Yisrael doing Shahiya b'shoigeg. And the Ramah said, when a Yisrael does Shahiya b'shoigeg, we don't aser mitztamik v'yafaloi. We say that mitztamik v'yafaloi is very little hana that you're getting from the iser, and therefore the food is mutter. Said the Ramah, if an Eina Yehudi does Chazara, we apply the same halacha. Why, says the Mishnah Berurah? In the words of the Mishnah Berurah, he says, because the maisa that an Eina Yehudi does b'mezid cannot be more chamor than the maisa a Yisrael does b'shoigeg. So if we see that when a Yisrael is over on Shahiya b'shoigeg, the halacha is that the food is mutter if it's only mitztamik v'yafaloi. So then if an Eina Yehudi does Chazara b'mezid, it's also mutter if the food is mitztamik v'yafaloi. Now, that's a little bit strange because the Mishnah Berurah seems to be comparing apples and oranges, right? The Mishnah Berurah is saying, since when a Yid does Shahiya b'shoigeg, the food is mutter if it's mitztamik v'yafaloi, so if an Eina Yehudi does Chazara b'mezid, it can't be worse than the Yisrael doing Shahiya b'shoigeg. Now, it's very nice. You're talking about a Yisrael and an Eina Yehudi, and you're saying that the Eina Yehudi can't be more chamer than the Yisrael. I get that. But you're comparing Shahiya and Chazara. You're comparing the halacha of a Yisrael that does Shahiya b'shoigeg to an Eina Yehudi who does Chazara b'mezid. Now, Chazara is always more chamer than Shahiya. So, what's the rationale? This rationale that the Mishnah Berurah seems to be applying to the Ramah doesn't seem to hold water. This is a question that the Bir Halacha asks, and hopefully I'll give the answer a little bit later in the shir. It's going to come into play a little bit later, but let's try to bear that in mind. Now, against this backdrop, let's go to the top line of Chaf Aleph Amud Beis, continues the Ramah. The Ramah says, okay, we just discussed the halacha if an Eina Yehudi does Chazar. Okay, how about if a Yid does Chazar? Says the Ramah, Vim hechzira Yisrael. Let's say a Yisrael does Chazara on Shabbos. He takes the pot, he puts it back on the fire on Shabbos. Says the Ramah, Vim hechzira Yisrael dinoi ka'avar v'shah. The halacha, if a Yisrael does Chazara on Shabbos, that's the equivalent of a Yisrael doing Shahiya b'mezid on Shabbos. If a Yisrael does Shahiya b'mezid on Shabbos, the food is asur. It's also whether it was not mavushal kol tzarchai. It's also if it was mavushal kol tzarchai, but it was mitztamik v'yafaloi. If you're over an issa d'Rabbanan b'mezid on Shabbos, we ask for the food. So says the Ramah, if a Yisrael does chazara on Shabbos, then that food becomes aser, even if it was only mitztamik v'yafaloi. Now the Mishnah Berurah is going to explain right away the reason we're treating this so strictly is because, again, like I mentioned earlier, when you do chazara, you're doing a maisa on Shabbos. You're putting the food on the fire on Shabbos. So therefore, if a Yid does chazara on Shabbos, even if the only benefit that you got was mitztamik v'yafaloi, the food is going to be aser on Shabbos. Continues the Ramah, v'im mitztamik v'raloi, but let's say a Yid did chazara on Shabbos, and the food was mitztamik v'raloi. Now, you're not allowed to do chazara, even if it's mitztamik v'raloi. The Mishnah Berurah is going to say, certainly, l'chatchila, this is aser. You're not allowed to put the food back on the fire on Shabbos, even if it's mitztamik v'raloi. But now, b'di'evet, you went ahead and you put the food back on the fire on Shabbos, but it was mitztamik v'raloi. Says the Ramah, mitztamik v'raloi mutter. Then the food is mutter. Why? Sharei loy nenem ino iser. Because you didn't get any hana from what you did. Okay, now, just another point. When the Ramah talks over here about a Yid doing chazara on Shabbos, what kind of food are we talking about? Well, it has to be food that was mavushal kol tzarchai. If it's not food that was mavushal kol tzarchai, and a Yid went ahead and put it on the fire on Shabbos, then he was over on the Isser of Bishul on Shabbos. Forget an Isser d'Rabbanan of chazara. If you take uncooked food, if you take food that's not completely cooked, and you put it on the fire on Shabbos, you're performing Bishul on Shabbos. So when the Ramah talks over here about a Yid that did chazara on Shabbos, and we're declaring is the food aser, is the food mutter, we have to be talking about food that's mavushal kol tzarchai. We cannot be talking about food that's not mavushal kol tzarchai. We're also not talking about food that's mavushal kol tzarchai, and it's mitztamik v'raloi. Because like the Ramah just told me, if it's mitztamik v'raloi, then the food is mutter, because you didn't get any hana from the fact that you did the chazara. So realize that we're talking here specifically about food that's mavushal kol tzarchai, it's fully cooked, but it's mitztamik v'yafaloi. That's when we have a question over here. That's not when we have a question. That's when the Ramah is saying, if a Yid did chazara on food, on Shabbos, if it's food that's mavushal kol tzarchai and it's mitztamik v'yafaloi, so then the halacha is like avar v'shah. Then it's the same halacha as somebody who did shahiya b'mezid. The halacha is that the food is aser. Even though the only benefit you got was the mitztamik v'yafaloi, the food is still going to be aser because you did a maisa on Shabbos. Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. It says the Mishnah Berurah is cut in lamed. V'im hechzira Yisrael b'Shabbos. If a Yid performed chazara on Shabbos, he put food back on the fire on Shabbos. Afilu b'shoigeg. Even if he did it b'shoigeg. Over here, we're not drawing a distinction between mezid and shoigeg. By somebody who was shachach v'shah, or by shahiya, we drew a distinction between shoigeg and mezid. We said if it was shachach v'shah, if a Yid did shahiya b'shoigeg, mitztamik v'yafaloi, we're going to be matir it. If he did it b'mezid, we're not going to be matir it. But over here by chazara, we don't draw a distinction between b'shoigeg and b'mezid. If a Yid put food back on the fire on Shabbos and it's mitztamik v'yafaloi, even if he did it b'shoigeg, the food is going to be aser. And explains the Mishnah Berurah, afilu b'shoigeg, dinoi ka'avar v'shah b'mezid, it gets the halacha of somebody who was avar v'shah b'mezid, v'aser b'mitztamik v'yafaloi. V'atam de machmerina b'chazara tfei mim'shiyah. Why are we being so machmer by chazara over shahiya? Mishum de ka'avid maisa. Because now you did a maisa on Shabbos. So now we treat it very chamor. And even if you did chazara b'shoigeg, and the only gain that you got was the mitztamik v'yafaloi, the food is going to be aser. V'ayim b'magen Avram, take a look at the magen Avram, shapasak upaskins, de la'acherim shari bazeh. You did chazara b'shoigeg on Shabbos, and it was b'stamik v'yafaloi, the food is usher to you and to the people of your household, but it's mutter to other people. The food was mavushal called tzarchai, and you did it b'shoigeg, and the only gain that you got was b'stamik v'yafaloi. Says the Magen Avraham, we're going to be matter the food for other people. Your neighbor needs a chalent, you could give it to him, but it's not going to be mutter for you or your people of your household. Now, the Mishnah Berurah makes another point. Remember, everything that we've been discussing so far has been the shita of the Rif and the Rambam, who go l'chumrah, who paskin like the Chachamim will argue with Hananya, and they're machmer by Shehiyah. Later today, we're going to see the day of Shniya that paskins like Hananya and is mekel. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, that machloikis does not affect the halacha that we just learned. Says the Mishnah Berurah, V'da, the din zeh, this halacha of a Yisrael who does chazara on Shabbos is unaffected by that machloikis. V'da, the din zeh hu afilu l'shitas haramah. This halacha, that the food becomes aser if a Yisrael does Shia on Shabbos, is even according to the shita of the Ramah, the poisik b'soif asif k'hayesh oimrim, who's going to paskin like the day of Shniya, the b'shehiyah mutter k'Michael ben Drusai, who paskins very kuladik by Shehiyah, and says that Shehiyah is mutter as long as the food was cooked k'Michael ben Drusai. As long as the food was cooked either a third or a half of the way done, then Shehiyah is mutter. That's the day of Shniya. It's very mekel by Shehiyah. But that kula doesn't affect this halacha that we just learned about a yid that does chazara on Shabbos. Hacha b'chazara, over here where we're discussing chazara, which is more chamor than Shehiyah, shavim heim lidina. The halacha by chazara is the same between the day of Rishayna and the day of Shniya. Because everybody holds that chazara is aser on Shabbos, even if the food is mavushal called tzarchai. It's aser if it's b'stamik v'yafalai. It's also lechatchila if it's b'stamik v'ralai. That everybody agrees to. So there's no difference between the day of Rishayna and the day of Shniya when it comes to this discussion of chazara. Oiskat and Lamed Vav, the Ramah said, how about in b'stamik v'ralai? If a yid did chazara on food that was b'stamik v'ralai, then the Ramah said the food is mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ritzaydar Loimar, Avagav de lechatchila also b'chazara afilu mitztamik v'raloi. You're not allowed to do chazara on Shabbos even if it's mitztamik v'raloi. But b'diavad, if a yid did do chazara by mitztamik v'raloi, we're not going to answer the food. Mutter afilu hechse b'mezid. The food is going to be mutter even if you did the chazara b'mezid. Why? Sharei loinena klal. You didn't get any anoah. We're not going to answer the food if you didn't derive any benefit from the maisa that you did. Okay, pause. Now, I mentioned to you a kasha at the beginning of this year, and I'll spell out the kasha to you now very clearly. We said that if a yid, this is again according to the day of Rishayna, if a yid does shehiyah b'shoigeg, so b'shoigeg, shachach v'shah, he forgot, and he left his pot on the fire on Erev Shabbos, and he left it on the fire going into Shabbos. And it was a case where Shehiyah is aser, according to the day of Rishayna. Shehiyah is aser. It's mitztamek v'yafaloi. It's not garafikotum. You have coals. So it's a perfect storm. It's a case where Shehiyah was aser. And shachach v'shah, you did Shehiyah. The Mechaber said, what's the halacha? He said, it depends. If the food is mavushal kol tzarchai, and it's just mitztamek v'yafalai, the food is mutter. Why? Because you got a very small gain. You derived very little hana from this shoygig that you did. All you got was the mitztamek v'yafalai, so the food is mutter. If the food wasn't mavushal kol tzarchai, then we have to answer the food, because you got tremendous hana. The food wasn't edible, now the food is edible. That's the halacha by shachach v'shah. Said the Ramah, how about if an Eina Yehudi did chazara? Said the Ramah, an Eina Yehudi did chazara, the halacha is equivalent to a Yisrael who did shehiyah b'shoigeg. Said the Mishnah Berurah, why the equivalence? Explained the Mishnah Berurah, because when we're talking about an Eina Yehudi doing chazara, that cannot be worse than a Yisrael doing Shehiyah b'shoigeg. Question was, why are we comparing apples and oranges? Why don't we look at, let's say an Eina Yehudi did Chazar. So an Eina Yehudi did Chazar b'mezid. Let's look at what the halacha would be if a Yisrael did Chazara b'shoigeg. If a Yisrael does Chazara b'shoigeg, the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Cotton Lamed Hey, just told me that if a Yisrael does Chazara b'shoigeg, then the food becomes aser. When a Yisrael does Chazara, the Ramah said, that's the equivalent of doing Shehiyah b'mezid. If you do Shehiyah b'mezid, mitztamik v'yafaloi, the food becomes aser. So why are we comparing an Eina Yehudi doing Chazara b'mezid to a Yisrael doing Shehiyah b'shoigeg? Compare, instead, an Eina Yehudi doing Chazara b'mezid to a Yisrael doing Chazara b'shoigeg. And when a Yisrael does Chazara b'shoigeg, the food becomes aser. So if an Eina Yehudi did Chazara, the food should become aser. Yet that's not what the Ramah says. So the answer is to be found in a Bir Halacha on Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph, Bir Halacha Dibra Maskal Dinoi Keshachach V'Shah. I'm not going to go through it inside, we don't have time. But what the Chavetz Chaim says is, we're not going to compare an Eina Yehudi doing Chazara to a Yisrael doing Chazara b'shoigeg, because we're being very machmir on a Yisrael who did Chazara b'shoigeg. And we're turning around and we're saying, even though you did it b'shoigeg, since you did a maisa on Shabbos, we have to ask for the food, even though the only benefit you got was b'tztabek v'yafaloi. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the Bir Halacha, that chumrah is not so muskim. It's not so klar that we have to be machmir so much. In the words of the Mishnah Berurah, Desham gufa loy psika kolkach. It's not so klar that the halacha really follows that chumrah, ki agoyis ashri mistapik bazeh. Agoyis ashri is besupik, whether or not that's true. So you're right, we're being very machmir on a Yisrael who goes ahead and does chazara, even though he did it b'shoigeg. But now you want to put that chumrah on an Eina Yehudi who does chazara? Says the Bir Halacha, that vite we're not going to go, that doesn't pass, we're not going to do that. Okay. Wow, this is complicated stuff. I have to push a lot into one shear in order to cover the page. I hope that it's clear enough. I hope that everybody could follow. The beauty of the online shear, there's pros and cons to the online shear. The beauty to the online share is you could hit the pause button and you could freeze me and you could go back 30 seconds and you could play it again. So if you need to, I hope that's what the Olam does. All right, so we've covered over here the Deya Rishona when it comes to Shehiyah. The Deya Rishona brought down to the Mechaber. Very machmer on Shehiyah. Shehiyah is aser, even if the food is mavushal kol tzarchai, as long as it's mitztamik v'yafaloi, Shehiyah is aser whenever there's a risk of shema yechata begecholim. So if it's fueled with gefes ve'etzim, anything that makes coals, it's not gorafikotum, so then you have a problem of shema yechata begecholim. Now we're going to turn to the day of Shniya. If you take a look at Beragola Ois Cotton Yud, you'll see that this is Shitas Rashi v'Taisvis, who are going to be Mekel, and they paskin like Chananya. Let's take a look here in the Mechaber. V'yeshayim, there are those that say, and there are much more Mekel. V'yeshayim, there are those that say, Shekol shenispashel k'Michael ben Drusai. Whenever you have food that's cooked to the degree of Michael ben Drusai, Pirush, what does that mean? Michael ben Drusai. Shem Adam, this is the name of a certain person, a bandit. Shahiya oichel ma'achaloi shaloi nispashel kol tzarchai. He was always on the run, so he never had time to eat a well-done steak. He always ate rare, very rare. So he ate his food when it wasn't nispashel kol tzarchai. So we have a Yeshayim that says, as long as the food is cooked to the degree of Michael ben Drusai, or it's fully cooked, u'mitztamik v'yafaloi, but it's still mitztamik v'yafaloi, continued cooking is still beneficial, mutter lahashaysei al gabi kira. You're allowed to do shehiyah on a kira, No problem. Says the Rama interjects and he says, Haga, Oyafilu al gabi tanur, or even on a tanur. Remember yesterday we said that a tanur is more chomer than a kira, because of its shape, it maintains a higher degree of heat. Says the Rama, according to this Yesh Oimrim, your food is Kamichael ben Drusai, your food is mitztamik v'yafalai, you could do Shehia, you could do it on a kira, you could do it on a tanur. Continues the Mechaber, Afilu husak begefes ve'etzim, even if you used fuel like gefes ve'etzim that makes coals, Afilu ein a grufa uktuma, even if it's not gar fekatum, you didn't sweep out the coals, you didn't bank the coals. This shita, Rashi and Taisus, very makel. They paskin like Chananya. They say that the first Mishnah in Kira is talking about Shehia, and that Mishnah tells us how to paskin. That Mishnah tells us to paskin like Chananya, that Shehia is very makel. As long as the food is cooked to the degree of Michael ben Drusai, all bets are off. You want to do Shehia, go ahead. You know why? Because we're not concerned. Once your food is cooked to the degree where it's edible, you're not going to be mechata b'gechalim. It's mitztamik v'yafaloi. You're not going to be mechata b'gechalim to make it mitztamik v'yafaloi. It's Shabbos. You know that bishul is aser. You know avar is aser. So this is a very cool dikashita. Continues the mechaber. V'lo yehuskara grufa uketuma v'husak bekashu givava. This whole discussion that we find in the Gemara about whether the kira is fueled with gashu givava or it's fueled with gefes ve'etzim, the whole thing that we learn about the etza of grufa uketuma, we only speak about this it's only negeya to food that's not cooked to the degree of Michael ben Drusai. You're right. If you have food that's basically, it's almost raw, if you have food that's partially cooked, but it's not even cooked to Michael ben Drusai, then we would have a Shia problem. Then we need the discussion of Grufa Uktuma. We need the discussion about the difference between Gefes Ve'etzim and Kasha Givava. But once the food is cooked to Michael ben Drusai, Shia is mutter. V'chein, also, we need to discuss Grufa, Ktuma, Kash, Givava, Gefes, Ve'etzim, Le'inyanim not ala K'teira me'aleh, Ba'al lachzira aleh b'Shabbos. This discussion of Grufa, Ktuma, really Grufa, this discussion of Gefes Ve'etzim versus Kasha Givava, it's also going to be Negeya later on in this Siman when we discuss the halachas of Chazara, but not Shehia. Shehia is perfectly mutter once the food is cooked to the degree of Michael ben Drusai. Continues the Mechaber, and he says, therefore, V'im shachach v'shah tavshil shehischel lehispashel v'lo higia Michael ben Drusai. Let's say you have food that was partially cooked, but it wasn't Michael ben Drusai. So Shehia is aser, even according to the day of Shniya. So then aser, you did Shehia on food that was not mavushal kol tzarchai. It wasn't even, forget mavushal kol tzarchai. You did Shehia on food that wasn't mavushal to the degree of Michael ben Drusai. So then, even if you did it b'shaygig, even if you were shachach v'shah, we're going to ask the food. You know why we're going to ask the food? Because if it wasn't cooked to the degree of Michael ben Drusai, it wasn't edible. If you did Shehia and it got cooked on Shabbos, so then we taka have to worry, Shebi Yechata B'Gechalim, it wasn't edible. So then then we're going to ask for the food. Ve'ein tzarich loymar mavar v'shah. Certainly, if you did it b'mezid, if b'mezid you did Shehia on food that wasn't Michael ben Drusai, certainly we're going to ask for the food. So here we have the very kuladika Deya Shniya, who holds in a nutshell that the only time Shehia is aser is if we're dealing with food that wasn't even cooked to the degree of Michael ben Drusai. Haga, says the Ramah, v'noagu lahakel kisvara achrayna. The minig is to be noyeg like the much more kuladika Deya Shniya. Okay, let's see the Mishnah Berurah over here, beginning with Mishnah Berurah's Kat Lamed Zayin. V'yesh omer mishakol. Explains the Mishnah Berurah what the rationale of this day Shni is. Svir lahu, these shitas hold, to kevan shenis bashal, once the food is cooked to the degree, sheroi lechal al yedei atchak, where the food could be eaten, even if it only could be eaten al yedei atchak, it's mavushal k'Michael ben Drusai, we're not bandits, we're not on the run, but the food is edible, it's Michael ben Drusai, under present circumstances, you could eat it. once the food is cooked to that point, su lekalamech Hashem yechata. We no longer have Xer, Shem yechata b'gecholim, and there's no Isser Shehiyah. The Kevin Cheroy Lachila, Lama Yechata Bechinam. Why would you go ahead and be Bechata if the food is already edible? Or Lekach Shari, Afilu Be'ena Grufu Ktuma, and therefore the food it's mutter to do Shehiyah even if the Kira is not Grufu Ktuma. There ain't Tzarech Lazeh, and we don't need Grufu Ktuma. We don't need the Eitzer of Grufu Ktuma, Elikish Adayin Lo Yigil Michael Ben Drusai. According to this Shita, the only time we need Grufu Ktuma, the only time there's an Isser of Shehiyah is if the food was not cooked, Kamachal Ben Drusai. If it wasn't cooked, Kamachal Ben Drusai, then we have to worry, Shem Yechata B'Gecholim. Oy Kishabal Lachzira B'Shabbos, or when it comes to Chazara. Demersi Kibavasha L'meina Grufa. When it comes to Chazara, we have a different problem. When it comes to Chazara, we're concerned that if you put food on Shabbos, on a kira, that has coals in it, it looks like you're doing bishul on Shabbos, even if the food is cooked. So Chazara is more chomer. Kamachal Ben Drusai. What is Kamachal Ben Drusai? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Yesh Oimrim Chatzi Bishul. Some say this means it's cooked halfway. V'yesh Oimrim Shlish Bishul. Others say even if it was only cooked 1/3 of the way. V'al Shulchan Aruch l'kamam b'Siman Reish and Daled Sif Beis Sasam Chatzi Bishul. The Shita of the Mechaber is, it seems, in Siman Reish and Daled, that Kamachal Ben Drusai means it's cooked halfway. Uvim Kamat Chak Efshad Yesh Lahakal. Under pressing circumstances, we could be makel, and we could consider Kamachal Ben Drusai even when it's cooked only 1/3 of the way through. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Kat Lamites. The Ramah said that according to this day Shniya, that paskins like Hananya, not only can you do Shehiyah on a kira if the food is cooked Kamachal Ben Drusai, you could do Shehiyah even on a tanur that's much hotter. You could still do Shehiyah if the food is cooked Kamachal Ben Drusai. Because we don't differentiate between the more intense heat of a tanur and the less intense heat of a kira. Ella masha aser b'kira she'ena grufa. When ella masha aser b'kira she'ena grufa mishum chshash chitoi. Whatever we say is aser by a kira when it's not grufa, because we have achshash Shem yechata b'gecholim, asvinan betanur afilu begoruf. Right? Something where a case where shehiyah would be aser on a kira if the kira is not grufa, right? But it would be mutter if it is grufa. So you have food that's well, let's not get into that. But in a case where shehiyah would be aser on a kira when the kira is not grufa, it remains aser on a tanur even if the tanur is grufa. What's the point? The point is, what is the basis to be machmir by a tanur over a kira? The basis, we explained this yesterday, is that by a kira, when it's grufa, when you sweep out the coals, we're no longer afraid shem yechata b'gecholim. But by a tanur, even if it's grufa, we are afraid shem yechata b'gecholim. Why? Because even if there's only a few embers left in the tanur, you still might be mechata it, because that little bit could fire up enough to make a significant difference in a tanur. Because a tanur retains so much heat that just stirring up a few embers could make the tanur hot enough to make a difference. By a kira, it can't. That's the whole basis for a difference between a kira and a tanur. But, says the Mishnah Berurah, Avamashi tira b'kira afilu be'ena grufa. But anything that we're ready to be matir in a kira, even if it's not grufa, because you're not going to do chitoi because the food is already cooked. Gam b'tanur mutter. In other words, the day shniya is saying that there's no iser shehiyah on food that's already cooked kamachal ben drusai. Why? Because once it's cooked kamachal ben drusai, why should you be mechata? The food is already edible. You're not going to be mechata b'gecholim. So that's mutter. Why would we aser it by a tanur? The same way, you're not going to be mechata b'gecholim by the kira, because the food is already cooked kamachal ben drusai. You're also not going to be mechata by a tanur if the food is already kamachal ben drusai. So what that a tanur is hotter? What's the difference? So there's no basis to make a differentiation here between a kira and a tanur. Ois cotton mem al gabi tanur v'wadin b'soicha tanur v'akira. The day shniya would hold that you could do shehiyah inside the tanur, in the bottom, or inside the kira, in the bottom of the kira. As long as the food is cooked kamach medrusai, you could do shehiyah. Ois cotton mem aleph. We only need the discussion, the Mechaber said, of grufa, ktuma, gefes, eitzim, kash, givava. We only need this whole discussion. It's only germane, according to the day of Shniya, when you're talking about food that was not cooked k'maycha ben drusai. That's when there passes an Isser D'Rabbanan of Shehiyah. If the food was not cooked yet to the point of Michael ben Drusai, you could have an Isser of Shehiyah. Because Shem Yechata B'Gecholim. Ois cut mem aleph, v'lo higia. Does Chayshinan Shem Yechata B'Gecholim. Im Huska B'Gefes V'Eitzim. V'gam Einen Grufim in Gecholim. When you have food that's not yet cooked, Michael ben Drusai, so then if you're dealing with a kira that has Gefes V'Eitzim, so it has coals, and it's not Grufu Ktuma, it passes an Isser of Shehiyah. Right? But if it's cooked, kamach ben drusai, there is no gzeira shem yichata b'gechalim. Oiskan membez ubala hachazira. This discussion of grufa ktuma, it's also germane to the halach of chazara. I'll come on b'sif beis, which we're going to see in greater detail in sif beis. Then the Mechaber said, if you did shehiyah b'shoigeg, according to the Diyashniya, if you are shachach v'shah, so you had a case that shehiyah is aser according to the Diyashniya. What's that? You had food that was not Michael ben Drusai, and you did shehiyah. Says the Mishnah got Mem Gimel, v'lo higia de behagia. If the food was Michael ben Drusai, l'dei zumutar afilu lechatchila. According to the Diyashniya, shehiyah is perfectly mutter once the food is Michael ben Drusai. The only shaila is if it wasn't Michael ben Drusai. Over here, the Mishnah Berurah says, even though I told you above that the Mechaber seems to say in Reish Nun Dalet that Michael ben Drusai is halfway cooked, over here the Mishnah Berurah says, B'di'evet, if somebody was shachach v'shah, he accidentally left food on the fire on Erev Shabbos that was not yet Michael ben Drusai. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if it was cooked a third of the way through, b'di'eved, we could consider that Michael ben Drusai. Sharabu aim the b'shitazu, because many paskin this way, ayin be'elya rabba. Ois cut mem dalid. If you did shehiyah b'shoigeg, according to the day of Shniya, aser, the food is going to be aser. Hainu afilu la'acherim ad Motzei Shabbos, where we say it's aser not only for the one who did the shehiyah, it's also even for other people, and it's also Tomasi Shabbos. Because now you're talking about doing shehiyah on food that wasn't even cooked, Kamaicha ben Drusai. Now it could be you did bishul on Shabbos, b'shoigig. So now the food is going to be also. You got a lot of hano here. You had food that wasn't edible. It became edible on Shabbos. So now you're talking about not just stam shehiyah, you're talking about where the food got cooked on Shabbos. You didn't do bishul on Shabbos because you put the food on the fire in Erev Shabbos. Siman Reish Nun Beis. You put the food, you did your maisa on Erev Shabbos, it became cooked on Shabbos. But this is an Isser D'Rabbanan. You're not allowed to do shehiyah. You did shehiyah, you allowed the food to become cooked on Shabbos against the Gzeir Shem Yechata B'Gechalim. You had a lot of hana, because before the food was inedible, now it's edible. Now the food is aser. It's aser for you. It's aser for others in Tomasi Shabbos. V'im ba'inan b'zeh b'chtei sheyaseh, whether or not you have to wait b'chtei sheyaseh, ayin la'el b'sif cotton lamid beis. Whew! Okay. A lot of material here. Let's push a little bit further because the rest is really very, very simple. Says the Mechaber. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 6 lines off the bottom, a little bit past the halfway point in the line. Says, I know it looks like there's a lot of material left over here, but it's very simple. Says the Mechaber, V'chol zeh be'inyan shehiyah. Realize, this whole discussion, this whole lengthy discussion that we're having, Day Rishayna, Day Shniya, Day Rishayna's Machmir, Day Shniya's Mekel, V'chol zeh be'inyan shehiyah. This is only germane to shehiyah. And at what type of shehiyah? Shahakdera yesheves al kisei shel barzel, oy al gabe avonim ve'eno nagas b'gecholim. Okay, let's say you have a pot, and the pot is inside the kira. Remember, the kira is like that inverted pot. The fuel is downstairs inside the bottom. Normally you put a pot up on top. Now let's say you did shahiya inside the tanner. When shahiya is mutter, she is mutter inside the tanner as well. But there's a new problem that the Mechaber is discussing here. Besides the whole question of shahiya, and when is shahiya mutter, when is shahiya aser, if you're putting a pot inside the bottom of the kira where the coals are, if the pot is sitting inside the coals, if it's resting on the coals, you have potential for another 3 problems. What is that? First of all, if the pot is submerged, not fully, but even if the pot is partially submerged in the coals, there are those that hold that that's considered hatmana b'davar shemoisef hevel. Hatmana is insulating a pot. A davar shemoisef hevel is material that adds heat. Now, coals are definitely materials that add heat. It could be, if the pot is sitting inside the bottom of the kira in the coals, so that the coals go up a little bit on the sides of the pot and on the bottom of the pot, that might be considered hatmana. That's potential problem number 1. Potential problem number 2. If you have a pot that's sitting on coals, and now you pick up the pot, you might stir the coals. When you stir the coals, there are 2 potential problems. Havara, you might expose some of the coals to air, which will fire them up. You might knock over some coals and bury them, which would put them down. That would be kivui. That would be extinguishing them. So these are the issues that the Mechaber is now discussing. So the Mechaber says like this. This whole question was only discussing the shaila of shahiya. But how about these other shailas? So the Mechaber says like this. V'chol zeh b'inyan shahiya. Sha'akdera yesheves al kisei shel barzel. What's a kisei shel barzel? Kisei shel barzel literally means a seat of metal. What this means is you put the pot in the bottom of the kira, but you rested it on a metal stand. Imagine you have a platform with legs. The platform is sitting in the coal, but the top surface of the platform is above the coal. So when you put the pot on, this platform, this metal platform, is supporting the pot above the coals. So we just took care of the other 3 shilas. There's no hatmana issue because it's not in the coals. There's no havara, you're not stirring up the coals. There's no kivui, you're not stirring up the coals. So that's what the Mechaber means. V'chol zeh b'inyan shahiya, sha'akdera yeshev as a kisei shel barzel, oy al gabe avonim. Or you built up a platform of stones, and the pot is sitting on the stones. But again, it's elevated above the coals. Ve'eino nagas b'gecholim. It's not touching the coals. Aval hatmana al gabe gecholim. But if the pot is sitting inside the coals, even partially, so now you have hatmana, you're insulating the pot in the coals, l'divrei hakoil aser, everybody would hold that that's aser. Mishnah Berurah ois katan memhei, al kisei shel barzel kinyan pitput shel shalosh raglayim. This is a metal stand that has 3 legs. V'agecholim munachim tachtav, and the coals are underneath this platform. So when the pot is sitting on that platform, it's elevated above the coals. Ois katan memvav, but if it's sitting in the coals, you have a problem. Hatmana al gabe gecholim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, very important, and this is very negeya, halacha l'maisa. We'll come to this at some point. Hachi sfir le'laha mechaber. Here you see that the Mechaber paskins the imshule hakidera noigin begecholim, that if the bottom of the pot is resting on the coals, mikre hatmana. That's called hatmana. There are those shittas that disagree. There are shittas that hold that in order for something to be considered hatmana, the pot needs to be covered on all 4 sides, top, bottom, and all around. But if you have a pot that's resting on coals so that the coals are only touching the bottom, that's partial hatmana, that's not considered hatmana. But over here you see the Mechaber paskin is not like that. Umemela the aser afben is partial called sarchai umitztamik veraloi. Hatmana is very chomer. Hatmana is aser even by food that's mavushal called sarchai and mitztamik veraloi. You're not allowed to insulate a pot on Erev Shabbos with substances that add heat, like coals, even if the food is mavushal kol tzarchai and mitztamik v'raloi. The Mechaber paskins, if the pot is sitting on the coals, partial hatmana is considered complete hatmana, and therefore, says the Mechaber, we must be talking about a case where the pot is elevated above the coals. Ukidal kaman b'siman reishtun zayin sif zayin. Ois cotton mem zayin. No, we didn't do that yet. Says the Rabbah, Haga, v'yesh there are those that say, and this is the dissenting opinion, v'yesh there are those that say, da'afilu imakdera oimedes al gabe eish mamish, there are those that say that even if the pot is sitting on the actual coals, coals man shehi megula lamayla, as long as the pot is uncovered up on top, loy mikri hatmana v'shari, that's not called hatmana. This is the famous sheet of the Arzaruah, who holds that partial hatmana is not hatmana. If the pot is not matmin, if it's not insulated up on top, and over here it's not, it's just resting on the coals, there's no coals on top, pashtus, even if the pot has a lid, it's still not hatmana all around. The hatmana is the coals. The coals are only on the bottom, they're not on the top. So the Arzaruah holds that that's not considered hatmana. Therefore, says the Ramah, Yesharim da'afilu lamakterim and esagabi echpamish, calls man shimugul olamayla, loy mikri hatmana, v'shari, v'chein haminik. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut mem zayin, calls man, fa'afilu imaktera imedis b'say chatanor, fa'atanor sasam. You'll tell me, what do you mean it's not hatmana all around the pot? What if the pot is inside the bottom of the kira and the door is closed? So it's surrounded. Yes, it's surrounded, but it's not surrounded by the coals. The coals are the item that you're doing the hatmana with, not the oven. Lav b'chlal hatmanahi. That's not called hatmana. Ukidal kamam b'siman reishtun zayin sif ches ayin sham. Ois kat mam ches shehi magula. But if the pot is uncovered on top, it doesn't have coals on top. Hainu she'ein mechasa alei b'begodim milamala. If it's uninsulated on top, so then it's not called hatmana. While come on, Bereishtun Zayin Sifches, we're beginning to get into the halachas of Hatmana, Oiskat Mem Tes Vishari, Hainu du Rak Bechlal Shehia, Vishari Kishin Espashal Bimayim, Kamachal Ben Drusai, Lefi Shaman, Lefi Shman Shanagu, Kisfara Achroina. What the Ramah is saying is, again, the Mechaber is bringing up these additional shilas of Hatmana. Says the Ramah that there are those that hold that there is no shiloh of hatmana over here because it's not covered on all sides. And the Ramah says v'chein aminik. Continues the Ramah, Rakshen is haram lenatkan ktsas kaidam haShabbos ben ha'esh kedei sheyuchal Yisrael lahasirei misham. However, we do have the other problems that are pointed out by the Mechaber, which is stirring the coals, the potential for havara and the potential for mechaber. So on that, the Ramah says, you're right, I took care of one problem. The Mechaber said it has to be elevated above the coals on a stand. One reason was hatmana. I'm telling you that there are shitas that hold that this wouldn't be hatmana, even if it's sitting on the coals. But we still have the issue of how do you move the pot without dealing with havara and kibui. Says the Ramah, Rakshan is haram lanatkan ksas kodem haShabbos ben ha'esh. You would have to move it away from the coals, kedei sheyuchal Yisrael lahasirei misham, so that a yid could take the pot off and not be concerned with havara and kibui. V'im loy nitkai ben ha'esh. But what if you forgot to take it off of the coals? And now it's sitting on the coals on Shabbos. Says the Ramah, Yesh lahasirei misham al yedei eino Yehudi. You could ask an eino Yehudi to take it off the fire. The reason you could ask an eino Yehudi to take it off the fire, even though the eino Yehudi may very well do havara, which is a daraisa, and amir la'akum is aser, the answer is because he's not doing havara for you. You're not asking him to do havara. You need the pot. You don't need the coals to be fired up. He's doing what he needs to do. He's taking the pot off the fire. But you b'chlal have no interest in the havar and the kivui. That's why it's mutter to ask it any Yehudi. V'em leka any Yehudi, says the Ramah, if you don't have a guy available, mutter li Yisrael lahasirei misham, a yid could take it off, but v'yizar shi kachenu misham benachas v'lo yananei hagecholim. But he should move the pot very gently, so that he should not move the coals. The oz, and if he does do it gently, then afim yananon ktas, even if you end up moving the coals a little bit, davar she'ein miskavenhu, it's a davar she'ein miskaven. You're not interested in moving the coals. You just want to get the pot out. And Mishnah Berurah is going to say it's not a psik reisha, and therefore it would be mutter. Says the Mishnah Berurah, ois cotton nun. Yesh la sirai misham de kashal Yisrael lizar shelo yananeh gechala based on tilasa zaktera. The Ramah said preferably you should have an Eini Yehudi do this because it's going to be very hard for Yisrael to make sure that he doesn't move the gechalim. And lechatchila, we don't want you to get into that shaila. B'diavad, in a b'diavad situation, you don't have an Eini Yehudi available. Ois cotton on aleph mutter Yisrael b'diavad. It would be mutter for Yisrael to do this if he does it gently. V'davka kishay benes zaktera al gabe gechalim. But that's only if the pot is resting on the coals. But what if you have a situation where the pot is somewhat submerged in the coals? So now you have coals surrounding the pot. Then the Mishnah Berurah says a yid can't do that. Also Yisrael lahasiroi. Then it's also for a yid to move the pot. If you have coals surrounding the pot, then as soon as you move the pot, those coals are going to collapse. If they're on the bottom, we could say that you could move it without disturbing the coals. You do it gently. But if they're around the side, they're going to collapse. Because now, when the walls collapse, the bottom coals are going to become exposed to the air and they're going to fire up. And the ones that get buried are going to go down. And even though it's a davar she'ein miskaven, you're not interested, you have no intent for havara, you have no intent for kibui, and you gain no benefit from it. It's certain to happen, and therefore it's usher, even though it's a davar she'ein miskaven. There are those that are machmir over here, even through the agency of an Eini Yehudi. I am among Avram be'el Yerabah. When we come nearer to the Shabbos, al yedei Eini Yehudi. The din psichas hatanor, when it comes to the shail of opening up the oven, ustimasai, and closing it, al yedei Eini Yehudi, yispar b'seif shimun reish nun tes, ayin sham, b'mishnah berurah. Okay, before I just close out here, we saw the day of Rishayna, we saw the day of Shniya, we saw that the Mechaber says that we're noyeg like the day of Shniya, which is mekel, and says that שהייה is never aser once the food is mavushal to the point of Michael ben Drusai. We're going to have to discuss that a little bit lamaisa. Mirz Hashem, I'll open up tomorrow's shir with that information and with Abir Halacha. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The source of limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh Hashanah should say Yeshua Sefuris Parnasset Shadukim to those in need. We should be zeichet to see the Bias Kal Tzedek. B'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.